I think one of the big myths of art is that it's about imagination. Forget imagination, it's about observation. I think he was looking, seeing, experiencing, and in a way, recording. This idea that, oh, he just imagined these things is just such a nonsense. To the elite, to the dark cult, these are trophies. And our ignorance in admiring them is just absolutely, they're mocking us.
Thanks for doing this. Thanks for joining me. Me and you have already had a great discussion last week where you kind of laid out for me your entire list of presentations and what you can bring to the table when talking about art. But rather than obviously people hearing from me, you are the expert here. Perhaps, maybe, hopefully, the resident expert in the future. Who knows for this channel? But do you want to explain to the audience just what your background is, who you are, and where it is you come at all of this, and obviously maybe where you stand with conspiracy, because it's a bit of that's where I come from, and that's how we got here. And I'll give it to you to give an introduction, and we'll just get straight into it.
Well, it's a big topic, but I guess the shorter version is that, especially pertinent to what we're talking about today, is that I've been an artist for about 35 years or so, had over 30 solo exhibitions, lots of group exhibitions, have some works in public gallery collections, etc. Never made very much saleable art. I mean, never sold much art really, but I had a little bit of success. For a little while, I had a little bit in my kind of mid-30s. I think it's what Leonard Cohen calls my little running streak, where things sort of take a nosedive sort of after that. But I've also, along with that, because I never had very saleable art, I've had a career as a lecturer in art history and in studio art, been a curator at one stage, director of a couple of public galleries. So I've been around the art world and art community for a long time, but always, I guess, like so many people, felt myself a little bit on the outer because my ideas maybe don't quite gel with the mainstream, and increasingly so as I go through life. And I've always been interested in, always been a questioner, a curious person. So everything under the banner of conspiracy, some of the things that I had already been researching in the 1990s. But of course, we all kind of, I think, woke up with the jolt in 2020 to, I think, the scale of malevolence in the world has become more and more obvious. And probably prior to that, I would have called myself a lukewarm Christian. I'm not proud to say that, but having been raised in an Orthodox Lutheran childhood, had kind of drifted away from that, but now really feel myself a firm, strong believer in Christ. My idea of connecting with you was, apart from being a great fan of all the work that you do, is that I really like the idea of you exploring creativity and every aspect of that. And I understand you might be talking with other contemporary artists, people who have been around the art world, who have lots of other perspectives to share. But I felt in a way that what I could bring to the table was a bit of a discussion or a bit of a thought as to some of the art history that might shed a light into where we are now. I think we all agree, conspiracy or art world, whatever, we live in a very degraded culture. So everything from, we can say education, pharmacy, law, every aspect of our lives is a degraded version of what I think its ideals seem to be. And similarly with art. So we do see a lot of overtly satanic, overtly, debauched activities being celebrated in art. But how did we get here? And also, how can we look back into, especially modernism, I think, where a lot of the ground was set for the art that we see today, and learn from that or understand it. And, as a conspiracy theorist, we would also be very aware of the role that symbolism plays in, corporate logos, hand signals, architecture, the rest of it. But I'm sort of reading into some of this modernist art, symbols and clues that I think are definitely not part of mainstream art history. And I think that, what I've put together is kind of clues here and there. I have sort of some information and evidence to support that. But I feel like there's a lot more research to be done. And quite likely your viewers, being the thinking, curious people that they are, will have other things to bring to the table. So I sort of wanted to put out there on record some of these observations that I have, because I feel like art is really important. I still have a value for art, and yet we sort of need to save art from art. What is celebrated now, I think we both agree, is definitely not what we find valuable in art. So looking at Gustav Klimt, who was a Viennese artist, so Austrian artist, and we'll look a little bit about his background because it is important to understand context for that. But I don't want to could get a bit school teacher, so I'll sort of refrain from that and get to the really interesting bits, and the bits I think that your viewers will also, really be able to provide their own insight into as well. But I think this is something that is pretty well known, certainly in Europe and America. This painting is really celebrated. It might be one of the most famous contemporary recent artworks of modernism. So Klimt himself, let's see if I just go on to, I'll come back to Klimt in a minute, but this painting being very iconic, usually gets people swooning. So it's housed in a museum that was once a royal palace in Vienna, and it's almost 2 meters square. So that's very large, but also it's a square. That's very unusual in art to have a square canvas. It's kind of part of, I think, what makes his compositions kind of interesting. So there are formal aspects that I think we admire in this painting. But most people see this kiss as extremely romantic. It's called the icon of love. A woman falling away in her lover's embrace. And I don't see it quite so unproblematically. And we've talked a bit about that. I think you would agree. It is so iconic. The amount of merch is just enormous. I mean, and growing. It's not something that's fading. In fact, it's become more and more. You can see even clothing now is coming out, Klimt socks, and so on. So, it's again whether your viewers have been able to place this work. I bet they've come across it one place or another. I just want to point out the way our consumer displays are the new altars, aren't they? They're a kind of altar of they're so seductive, and we're meant to stand and admire whether we buy or not. So getting on to the artwork itself. So 1907, so early last century. And, I want to sort of almost apologize for the fact that we can't on a screen show the glitteriness of this artwork, which is very apparent if you're standing in front of it, because this is metallic gold, and that doesn't reproduce terribly well in a flat, still image. So it's not yellow, and it's not a grim grey metal. It's really sparkling. And Klimt went to great amount of trouble to put layers of gold leaf. And if you can see those swirls there on the man's dress, on the man's clothing on the left, these are actually slightly 3D. So he's used some gesso and other materials to actually make a 3D surface on the painting, and then gold leafed it. So this was very, very, very unusual for the time. And part of the reason, I think it will come to that, but his exploration of gold, his father was a goldsmith, and he came from that background. At one stage, he probably was meant to inherit the family skills in goldsmithery, but he was around gold all his life and will keep coming back to gold. So clearly it looks like, the title gives it away, an embrace, a kiss, romantic. They're sort of in the middle of it. There's nothing really. The subject matter is the kiss. There's a lot of empty space that tells you that. Now, pretty soon, I think you look closely, especially at the faces, and you think, hang on, she's swooning or asleep or on semi-sleep. Her eyes aren't completely closed. They're semi-closed. And her hands, it's not absolutely clear that she's in a relaxed position with this man. He's got a much more rigid grasping mechanism with his hands. It could almost be read that she's pulling him away from this embrace. It's not so comfortable, so relaxed. there's a lot of emphasis on these flowers in the painting. There's a lot of, the gold itself is this kind of sort of swirly shapes that keep recurring. And her dress is much more swirly and flowers, while his is odd, this rectangles, black and white, harsh contrast. I mean, there's definitely some kind of masculine, feminine thing going on there. Also wanting to point out the flowers, which, it's almost psychedelic, isn't it, in the way this kind of flower painting, which is obviously not doesn't look in the least bit natural. It's very stylized, and it's pretty much a given that this early period of what we would call Art Nouveau, or in Germany and Austria they'd call Jugendstil, so youth style, new style, was a prefiguring of all that psychedelic painting of the 60s and 70s. There's a real link there, as is, you talked about the kind of, in the astral world, these kind of etheric, druggy kind of induced states of seeing shapes, forms, patterns.
Through the use of flowers and
yes, especially through the natural
entheogens.
Pharmacology. Yeah.
There seems to be some kind of reference to being in a stupor or a haze, perhaps caused by psychedelia inducing chemicals from plants. It seems to possibly be there, just at a glance looking at this, the swirls, the all enveloping nature of the structures of the design within the people, to kind of getting lost in that ethereal sense, so
sort of melting away.
To not be as pretentious about it, either they're both tripping or she is. Something's going on, basically.
Something's going on for sure. Good. And just pointing out at the feet there, we also realize that she's kind of being constrained. Not only can she's on a cliff or some sort of shape where she can't step backwards, she can't step away, but there's some tendrils and ivy, just as there was ivy around the man's head, his hair, there's something gripping her, almost like she's being absorbed by the flowers, isn't she? She's becoming that floral.
The ivy leaf itself, what I do know from my brief stint into Greek mythology and Roman mythology, is Dionysus, the patron saint of theatre, drunkenness, sexual debauchery, that kind of just generally revelry in general. His flower was the ivy leaf that represented him. It was kind of he was heavily linked with the ivy leaf, and it's actually where we get the shape of the ivy leaf is based on that. Is where we get the heart symbol to represent Valentine's from today. It's actually a representation of the Dionysus cult, and the ivy leaf, and basically lust is what it represents. And she's bound in the vines of ivy, and ivy leaves there symbolically. And so just throwing that out there into the mix.
Oh, that's absolutely relevant. And just as we sort of look at this, as much as everybody wants to be photographed in front of it as a very, almost like a pure romantic love, it's much more about an eroticism, and a contrived sort of eroticism, a controlled. You even wonder whether this is non-consensual sexuality. I think it feels as though he's in a much stronger position. She may not even be fully conscious of what is going on. She may be already in this floral astral world, trance-like state. But people don't see that. Honestly, people don't see that, and it's not normally talked about. It's only been a couple of years ago that an article like this started to appear, 2023, in The Guardian, that somebody said, hey, hang on, is this a bit coercive? Is he actually controlling her? The longer we look, the darker it gets. They didn't go any deeper than that, although that's fairly shocking, because it was seen as this pretty, pretty image of beautiful romantic love. And I don't think these people photographing it are thinking of it as a dark painting, but rather as a gorgeous, beautiful, admirable thing. So yes, it's like, who really wants this? It's a strange scene. It seems romantic and joyful, but the longer we look at it, the darker it gets. And is she even unconscious? And could the man's embrace actually be violent?
Just for context, the people of Vienna would not hear this type of stuff about this painting.
Right. No, you're right. And we have to remember, don't we, that this is I mean, in England, call it the Victorian era, but really formal dress, very a very sort of stuffy conservative culture in Vienna, at least on the surface. So people would not have seen it. Although I think at the time, because it was surrounded with other works of his, and the way it was photographed was shocking, or was painted, was shocking. So, I mean, we're looking at something where, academic portraits and, kings and queens and the Impressionists were only just starting to be accepted. I always say this to people, we cannot find the Impressionist paintings as shocking, but they were shocking in their day. People were up in arms. Who could paint such, crazy, what are we looking at here?
And just as like a distinction as well, I think that people get confused when we say things like modernism. It started around this time. It's actually a lot older than what people think when they think of modern arts. I think they think of like the stuff in the galleries today, which I would say is more akin to postmodern arts, what came after this change from like a classical style. And then and these pieces of artwork, let's say they made in 1907, were radical for the time. And this was like the first real modern Art Nouveau, I should say, this new style, which was kind of the beginning of like deconstructivism in a way. I mean, there was always the Impressionists. There was always other people before this, who were kind of playing with forms and new ways of representing reality. But this is where you're starting to get to that way of like Picasso, let's say, breaking apart the structure and getting more conceptual with forms, that type of thing, really started to begin with people like Klimt. This is like the beginning of, let's say, the degradation, I would say. This is when the rot began, in a sense. And in these artists, I think, still had talent, at least in this time. So just, again, a bit of context for our listeners, what we're really doing here.
That's a very good point. So it's really this modernism from late 1800s to, especially we'd say around about the First World War. So it was this break with the past and lots of innovation. What can art be? A lot of it actually has to do with the birth of the camera and the prevalence of photography, because it sort of freed art or freed painting from realism. And in a way, I mean, not that the Impressionists weren't influenced by photography directly, but they were really wanting to convey emotions, psychological states, etc. But modernism comes with a lot of optimism and the idea that the world can be many things as a radical new way of seeing. But by the time the First World War, and certainly by the time the Second World War, that optimism had faded. And that's why we sort of, even though we talk about modern art now, it's not modernist art usually. It's art that, as you say, is kind of much more jaded, and we'd call it postmodern. So it no longer has that pure ambition of hope.
See, in postmodern art is rarely really optimistically rooted in its own culture. It's usually very against its own culture, or even the idea of having a culture at all. It's completely just deconstructionist. That's kind of it. It's like communism. You try to define postmodernism. Someone out there is going to tell you that's not real postmodernism. It's one of those sort of nebulous type of descriptors. But what it really means is after this type of work is what we're really saying, isn't it? That's the best way to describe it. So getting back to this type of work, continue, because this is getting good.
So just around that time, I always remind students, whether they're artists or students interested in art history, that artists of any era, at any time, anywhere in the world, are really aware of other artists' work, and especially their contemporaries. They really ferret them out. They look at them, they'll understand and observe them in ways that often art historians kind of have to catch up with, really. But you can just see the amount of co-influencing of all of these artists. It's part of what makes it so vibrant, is that the artists were looking at each other's work. And there's no doubt that Klimt had seen this work or a reproduction of, because now colour reproductions, etc., lithographs were becoming more available. So this is a Munch painting. So remember, Munch was the one who painted the screen. So the kiss is in a way no less frightening, his kiss. And it's really, I mean, it's either a face being eaten by another face. I mean, it's a bit zombie-like, isn't it? It's like kind of horrifying. And if you put it next to the Klimt, it does bring out the darker aspects of Klimt's painting. You can see that he wasn't just, he was not trying to paint romantic, erotic love, for its own sake.
Interesting.
So this is Mr. Klimt, and he used to go around in a painting tunic, but he used to go around in that all the time. So he was unusual. This was, can imagine, again, in Vienna, everybody in, three-piece suits and cloaks and hats and canes and moustaches and all of that. So he was seen as, you would say, in a way, a kind of a hippie at that time. But this linen painting smock he wore all the time, and too much information, nothing underneath, right? He wore nothing underneath.
Yeah.
So I wanted to show just also where he came from, but being I don't know whether he was bloodline. There are so many weird little offshoots of these important families, aren't there, that we can't keep track of them. The, illegitimate children of royalty, etc. Who knows? It's quite likely, but I'm not specifically seeing proof on that. But he was very interested in making his life in art. And what he first did was try to make a career as a portrait painter, which was a reasonably lucrative, if you could become well known for this career. And you could see his Lady in Black on the left is a portrait done as a society portrait, so of a wealthy commissioned portrait. It's very, very obviously, influenced by John Singer Sargent's Madame X, which was done partly as a portrait, but not like most of Sargent's portraits are just extremely flattering, extremely beautiful versions of the, usually rich women, especially that he was commissioned to paint.
So he was a talented painter.
He very talented, very skilled, and like a lot of artists back then, were absolutely endeavouring to do the very, 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 very best of everything that they did, and were learning and seeking to learn. So early on, too, he had some commissions to do murals, and this is including one that still exists today in the Art History Museum, the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. And you could just want to show, because it's kind of interesting. So there's this neoclassical building. I don't think this building, it's not very old. It's only, really genuinely, there was nothing there before this building, as far as I know. But built in a classical style, neoclassical style, not very complex. There's a lot of stucco, but his work would have been the paintings in between. But you can almost see the clash between classicism or neoclassicism, that was the fashion of the time, that the aristocracy wanted to keep all this Greek and Roman, allegory and so on, and his kind of creeping in with these weird patterns and use of gold and these figures that, it's a mishmash of styles. Apparent. So Klimt connected with a number of other artists who were, some architects, some designers, some writers, mostly visual artists, and they formed something called the Secession. And the Vienna Secession was a group who wanted to challenge the stuffy, formal academic painting art of the time that was popular, especially with the Habsburg Empire, which is the Franz Joseph and Maria Theresa and all of these extremely powerful Austro-Hungarian empire that had gone on for 500 years. And again, extremely conservative, and yet we know now all of these Habsburgs and these aristocrats were secretly, involved in, a lot of occult activities, secret societies, seances, black magic, but all behind the scenes, and absolutely keeping separate the appearance, this conservative appearance, with what went on behind. But the Secession people were wanting to challenge the classical in art and do something modern and new and fresh. And they amazingly got funding to build this pavilion, like a sort of display space, still there to this day. And this was where they were going to show their art. And they also made a magazine called Sacred Spring, Sacrum. And this is their slogan on top of this building says, "To each age its art, to art its freedom." So they believed in art for art. And at least that was the rhetoric. It's just a bit weird. So, I also just wondered, where did the money for this come from starving artists who were kind of not that very accepted or able to make much of a living. So it was actually Wittgenstein's father who gave the money, most of the money, for this building. It just gets odd, doesn't it? It just gets very odd very quickly, the connections between people.
It's like one giant club of artists, and they're all working with each other.
It is. And so whether it's just the new generation that is, challenging the old, it's a pattern though, isn't it? It's like, completely challenged, out with the old, in with the new. I mean, this is gorgeous art by our modern standards. It's the beautiful, design, architecture, Art Nouveau, as I mentioned. But it was a kind of celebration of decadence. And, we love all these flowing plants, this decorative aspect. But it was a celebration of decadence. So there's Klimt. We can see him on his kind of throne there. This is them getting ready to make an exhibition at the Secession. And there are other people there who, in art history, people would know their names, but they're not especially. They're nowhere near as famous as Klimt in this photograph. And on the left there, we see the Wiener Werkstatt, the workshop of, these are some of the craftspeople and designers making this gorgeous, but you can see the black and white, which we sort of associated with ritual space, actually. But anyway, but it almost, to us, it almost looks minimalist in a way, and yet what it was highly decorative compared to classical forms. On the right, there's a link slightly earlier, the arts and craft movement in Britain, and especially originating from Scotland, in Glasgow, the Glasgow School of Art, we call it. So Charles Rennie Mackintosh and his partner, his wife, Margaret MacDonald. So you can really see the connection in style. It's hard not to find this stuff very sort of fresh and clear and appealing. So one of his early commissions was for Klimt to paint a mural in this Secession building that we saw earlier, this pavilion, to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Ludwig van Beethoven's death. So remembering that all of those great musicians, Mozart, Beethoven, Mahler, all from or were supported by Viennese society. They all lived there and were supported. But this was 75 years after Beethoven had debuted his Ninth Symphony, which is the song of, we call it Ode to Joy. And the mural had other panels in between, but the mural was sort of depicting, through Klimt's eyes, the story of this man and knight coming from, going through all of these ordeals and then finding their way to this glorious humanity, humanistic, resolved in this, song of joy. And this is just it's kind of like the last panel in that frieze that's inside the Secession building. And on the left, there is actually meant to be a choir of maidens because, Beethoven's Ode to Joy includes incredible choral voices. And on the right, Klimt has made something that really prefigures 1902 as opposed to 1907 with the kiss. These figures merging into one another. But again, there's this slightly disturbing thing at the base on the feet, isn't it, where they're kind of bound, aren't they? Bound together by something it's almost like engulfing them. It's like moving or they can't escape from.
Interesting.
Yeah.
A lot like what we saw on the original Kiss painting. Her legs were bound in ivy. So it's actually something very similar, isn't it? And I've just noticed here, just on the side tangent, the little white circles there with the it's like the triangle in the center and it's been split into three. Isn't that the Google's Chrome logo today?
You're right. Yes, isn't that odd?
Just thinking,
Isn't that odd? Yes, like these stylized flowers. You do wonder whether these other shapes and forms, that we think are seemingly just decorative and playful, they have other references that we haven't quite tapped into. I mean, we know they're meaningful, but we don't know what exactly they're conveying.
I'm getting slight Freemasonic references here, because you have the man and the woman, the sun and the moon above, kind of symbolic represented there, and on the course from the looks of it with the blue streaks. Maybe the two pillars, Yakin and Boaz, there kind of represented. Obviously, the black and white floor represents the checkerboard of Freemasonry, and the building itself. If you go back a slide, there was a woman sat in the middle of the frieze there. And you have a model there of the actual building, don't you? Kind of laid out.
I think, a temple.
It reminds me of like a Babylonian or Egyptian temple of in like the way I've often seen them represented. You know what I mean? Like it looks
Yes.
very
Yeah,
much Solomonic.
for sure.
Solomonic is
Yeah.
a good way to describe it, with the two bowls at the entrance. It's very much
Yeah.
symmetrical with the two pillars. And so I can't help but see just immediately there's some kind of mystery school wisdom influence to all of this. That's probably the best way
Sure.
to describe it. I mean, even there in the top left of that image, are those naked children? And what I mean, what
Yeah, that's strange, isn't it? That's strange, or at least virgins, maidens, if not
something like that.
underage. Yeah.
Yeah, anyway, but we'll get back to that later.
Yeah.
I assume we'll carry on.
Yeah.
That's just some
No,
observations.
it's a good point. And Freemasonry was extremely popular. I mean, it was all over the world, but Vienna for sure. And even
yeah.
earlier, like Mozart was a Freemason. The Magic Flute is a Freemasonic referenced opera. So, and the number of secret societies was huge. I mean, Rosicrucians. I mean, also things that we don't have a name for. So at this time, the Tula Society that was very, very active in Munich had also very important links with Vienna. Maria Orsic, so the Brill Society, had
Brill,
very
yeah.
important. She was, she was from further east, but she lived in Vienna. But societies who I think we just don't know the name of, but there were many, 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 so you'd call them ritual circles. I just wanted to show on the left, it's not one of his famous paintings, but it's a very odd one. It's a bit earlier. And this was, he called it allegorical painting of love. And you just think, the more you look at it, you think, this is really odd. It's showing his skill as painter in that portraity style below. Again, kind of a kiss and kind of a dark male and being kind of overcoming a female on the left. So a bit of a pattern there. But these weird faces above, which are meant to represent, childhood innocence, maidenhood, the crone disease. But don't they look like all those photographs that we see, faked or not, of seances at the time? They really look like the faces appearing out of the smoke. It's odd, and I don't think it's like any other of his works. I mean, why put that in there? Isn't very...
It certainly has demonic connotations, summoning connotations. So it's like, it looks like they have summoned the spirits.
In the smoke, yes, in the smoky haze.
Something's happening. Maybe in the time of this, maybe it's like a sex magic ritual to maybe he's hinting of something he may have been involved with behind the scenes, and this is his public way of showing it without really showing it. I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, even on the image on the right, there's something ethereal happening above them.
Right.
As they embrace some kind of psychedelic, swirly gold waviness emanating from their action here, from what they're performing, with the thing that's happening. So maybe there's something here, like sex magic references.
Some kind of transformation, isn't it? It's like almost an alchemical, and literally, the alchemical thing, which is to turn lead, so base flesh, into gold.
Yeah, and this guy loved his gold, that's for sure.
Loved his gold, yeah. And so did Vienna at that time. So a little bit more detail of the Beethoven frieze, and just think, so odd. So although it was based on Beethoven's, I get a bit sidetracked here, so I won't spend too long on it, but although it was based on Beethoven's Song of Joy, it's also on Wagner. So the horrific, Richard Wagner, his interpretation, because, Beethoven's been dead for 75 years. Wagner at that time sort of revived it with much more drama, etc., and restaged Song of Joy. So on the left there, these, this is part of, I think, this knight is going through all these trials as he goes around the room, ending up with that kiss. But here, these sort of evil maidens and this weird, I mean, it's very King Kong kind of figure. But it was, this official story is that it was a Typhaeus, a giant ape-like monster, the offspring of, like, we're interested in this because we sort of have backstory, offspring of the earth goddess Gaia and Tartarus, god of the underworld. So again, one of those, Nephilim. And on his left, they're the Gorgons.
Yes, the three sisters.
Representing sickness, madness, death.
Yeah.
And on the right, this is really weird. There's a very sexual figure there, that seducer with the red hair. That's very sort of, kind of woman as whore sort of thing. But on the right there, that's meant to represent hope, that pregnant figure. I mean, it's just an odd image. It doesn't even look female. I mean, I know large breasts and belly, but I don't know. It's just like something from an Abbott and Costello movie or something. You know, it's like it's a
Yeah,
strange.
it's definitely kind of like a reverence of the grotesque in a very subtle way.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, on the left, they obviously the three gorgons, and then behind them, I mean, look at those monsters kind of peering through, and the wild-eyed zombies and creatures and beasts, and like that. I think that long-haired, decrepit-looking old skeleton type woman reminds me of something straight from Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, as she comes out of the bath. You know what I mean?
You're
and
right.
like comes towards him. It's odd imagery, isn't it? You know, and again the wild beast in the center there. I mean, that is a typical wild man of Europe depiction, I would say, which is a common, well understood ritualistic practice all throughout Europe that's been there since time immemorial, I would say. Particularly popular in Bulgaria with the cookery tradition, but it's not uncommon for even that region of Europe and in Switzerland as well to have the Basler Fastnacht ritual, where they dress like these creatures, these wild, hairy beast men, and have a huge festival once a year, just before the period of Lent, usually, where they dress in these masks that look just like this. So maybe he was drawing from European tradition of the wild man, perhaps, to include this. But rest assured, my research has showed me these represent the Nephilim. That's exactly what they were. And to have that incorporated in all of this, it's somebody who is intimately knowledgeable of occult knowledge would know about these things, is what I'm trying to say. And I feel like he's pretty much slapped it all together here in one mural.
Yeah.
And
it's pretty horrifying too, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of seductive and it's kind of embracing evil. Do you know, there is nothing positive or hopeful in this image, and it's supposed to be.
Even just behind, right in the bottom right corner of this painting is two skulls being enveloped by a hairy claw. Can you see that?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, right. Yes.
And then there's
oh, yes, a bigger figure behind somehow with a hand.
Well, all these blue circles with like white motifs, triangles, like spearing off, and then just above that hand clawing onto the skull is kind of like a scaly skin. Can you see, with green spots? And then there's kind of like a wing behind, just coming from the blue dress, like feathered motif. It looks like a wing with eyes. All of it looks like wings encrusted with eyes. Is that perhaps an angel reference here? The angel of death, perhaps, or something like this. There's something going on there.
And also this layering, isn't it? It's this layering of things. Nothing is static. Everything is like coming forward, back, layering.
And all this just to represent Beethoven.
Yeah, yes.
I don't know.
think he had that in mind. I don't think that was.
Yeah, I don't. That sounds like a good excuse, but I don't. Something else is going on here, that's for sure.
But there's a lot these days written about, Vienna, which it's still seen as the home of elegant classicism, and yet this explosive, raunchy, death, sex and death reference in these artworks that are seemingly otherwise beautiful and golden. So Klimt was very influenced by the mosaics of Ravenna. So Ravenna in Italy, northern Italy, where these incredible, not necessarily very large, they're reasonably sized cathedrals, but the mosaic decoration is unbelievable. It's very hard to capture on in a still photograph, because mosaics from that time period, so we're looking at 500 AD, are as fresh as they were made yesterday. They're not like painting that's faded or degraded or whatever. And also they collect the light, so a lot of gold that's shimmering in light, so nothing is static. The light is unbelievable.
Very much the Byzantine, Roman arch, early church periods type stuff here.
Right.
Look at that thing. It's incredible.
Beautiful.
The attention to detail is unbelievable, and none of it's faded. It's all kind of maintained its splendor because of, like I said, the nature of mosaics itself.
And you're right, you've been picking up on a lot of these little details. So here, in between, they've left no spaces undecorated. That was all to the glory of God. But they are really rendering kind of flower shapes, more like Islamic, Byzantine influence. But they're not these odd symbolic shapes that we've been seeing in Klimt. Or it doesn't seem to be.
No, very much
Oh, here we go.
a typically Christian reverence. You can see it.
Yes. And this is just a close-up of, just want to point out the Empress Theodora.
Mhm.
Again, it looks very flat and childlike, but they're just amazing. And he was also influenced by Russian Orthodox icons. You can see there the kind of connection between somehow the smoothness of the skin and the gold metal. And on
Yeah,
the right, the William Morris, which is earlier, the beautiful William Morris decorative
yeah.
plants.
I've noticed that in typical high street like tat shops where they have mass-produced artwork, Morris paintings are in again.
Oh,
I happen to have
interesting.
noticed that there's a lot of those going around. You know, his symmetrical
Interesting.
psychedelic flower patterns and all these type of things. Yeah, I think people are.
Wow. These things have these movements where they have these waves of, and then other times it's like nobody wants to know about them.
Yeah. Oh, it'll be here today, gone next month, and it'll be something else, no doubt. But I just noticed. You just reminded me of what I saw in
Been
Home
seeing
Sense
it.
recently. Just Morris prints everywhere, just
Yeah,
big one. I
yeah.
don't know
Wow.
why. Yeah,
Wow.
interesting.
We're going to look into that one day too. Not perfect, but this is another very, very famous portrait by Klimt of Adela bloc-bauer. And she became a very important figure of his life already before 1907. But this artwork is incredible. Again, 1.5 meters square, incredible. You can see the gold a bit better in this reproduction. And can you imagine how shocking and bizarre this was to make a portrait where, I mean, it's all pattern and eyes and so on. And but she became a patron and a lover, a partner of his. Well, he had so many, but anyway, she arrived on the scene. She was a young woman who married a very wealthy banker. And then you think, oh, hang on, Bauer, right? So Bauer was the name. The Rothschilds changed their name from Bauer to Rothschild.
Ah.
So again, these offshoots of family that may not be the main, they're not the top of the branches. They're not ones with Nathaniel Rothschild and the Rothschild in their name, but they are. The Bauer is absolutely connected. So very, very wealthy banking family supported him in most of his work, and I would say would be his entree into the deeper secret societies. Absolutely deeper. So this one's quite an amazing painting. Again, everybody just swoons over it, but it is so beautiful. I don't think he made any others that are quite as complex as that. I'll keep doing that. But this one, some people will know from a recent movie where the survivor of the family, so several generations down, was contesting the Viennese government for this painting, which had been stolen by the Nazis. And Vienna really put up a defense, did not want to let it go, but it was basically, it made it so difficult for her to do this law case. And she eventually won the rights to this painting and others. And the painting is now in New York. She's now brought it back to New York and set up a new gallery. So it's on public display in Vienna, but it's had a very interesting history. Gold is so important. I think I might have had this in slightly the wrong place, but anyway, gold was so important in Vienna just because it's a display of wealth, especially by what you would call that nouveau riche. And by that I mean people who are making their money by, the Rothschilds are not aristocrats. They are banking families. They emerged, late 1600s to, and then Napoleonic Wars is when they really came into wealth. So gold is worshipped on its own, but Vienna is associated with a large Jewish population from the Odessa, what we would also call Khazarian region. So I think all the viewers will know where to place all that kind of history. They were, as we've seen, chased out by the Nazis in World War II, but it was a really important part of the culture, and we could go on about how many kind of important or culturally significant Jewish people there were, contributing to cultural movement in modernism. But anyway, just back to Athena, she's the patron deity of Vienna. That's the statue above there on the left is in front of the parliament. And the one below is, there's a reproduction of the Pantheon Parthenon in Nashville, like a life-size reproduction.
I've
So
seen it.
have you?
But
Wow.
no, I've not seen it. But people have sent me this before, and you've got a small image there in the bottom corner. And I'll probably add an enlarged image if you haven't got one yourself to show this. But it's a very ghostly, weird-looking figure, very masculine, a very pale
Yes.
white skin look to it. Again, just ordained in gold. It's very creepy looking. It's the only way to
Yeah.
describe it.
And it is one of those things, obviously on the Parthenon in Greece, the statue is long gone. I mean, that it was a temple to the Athena, but we don't know exactly how the statue looked. So it is a bit doll-like and strange in the face. But you know, we used to think, oh, very nice allegory. Oh yeah, Athena associated with protection, you know, the warrior with wisdom. But now I don't think we see it as allegory anymore. I think there's an actuality to this. But she was you know, there was a direct connection with that. We call her demonic general, I guess.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, from my perspective, I'm fully believing that these things were actually knocking about as gods in a very real, literal sense, and they had offspring, which is a lovely face there on her chest of the Gorgon Medusa. And if you look at the mythology of the Gorgon, that was the offspring of Typhon mixing with Echidna, the mother of monsters, who was beheaded by Perseus, and the head was given to Athena as a gift. And she wore it as a pendant on her chest, which is why you always find Athena with this face on her chest, as like a good luck charm, basically.
Yes.
And the Gorgon is quite literally a Nephilim creature, the offspring of a sea serpent mixing with a human woman who had been genetically modified to be a snake lady. Basically, that's the story, you know. And Athena is just one of the many gods that were using people as playthings at the time. I believe it's not just mythology. I think it's real. I think artists like this are commemorating perhaps gods or goddesses they really do venerate behind closed doors, perhaps in the seances that are kept secret during this time, you know. And the serpent scale armor there, the fish scale armor, definitely tells many tales to me about the symbolism of where these things come from. Monsters from the sea, you know, is quite a common thing. And yeah, and Athena is... It's
this thing, there's definitely that thing you pointed out, this idea that she's wearing it as a trophy. I wanted to point that out because in one way, does that mean that she has sort of subsumed the power of the Gorgons? But it was a very important part of how she appears that she would have this Gorgon face on her cloak.
Well, actually, in Athens, it was common for the soldiers to have this on the center of their shields, the same image, and it's supposed to be a protection amulet of a form. I think they call it a Gorgonian. I think that's what the name is for the protection amulet of the Gorgon's face. And they put it on their shields, obviously, because it's a scary looking thing. Yeah. And it's supposed to put fear into the enemy as well, you know. And obviously the tale is that the Gorgon could turn you to stone with just a look, you know, because it's a fearful thing to behold. I'm not sure how much mythology or allegory that is, just to it simply being extremely terrifying to look at and you freeze with fear, you know, it's that type of thing. Symbolically speaking, having that on Athena's chest is quite relevant
really
for the goddess of war. Yeah, it makes sense to have something fearsome front and center as you charge towards the enemy type of thing.
And her spear is also important, is again something else that is a trophy that she gained through some battle or was given or whatever granted. But, you know, that's where where Shakespeare's name comes from, the spear shaking community in London. So when the sun would shine on the water, you know, near Athens, on the water in near Greece, they would say, "Oh, Athena is shaking her spear today."
Interesting.
So the spear shaker has a very occulted, very sort of significant and conscious sort of role somehow in the way our culture is built. I mean, there are people who've done really side tangent, but done fantastic research on showing that the Shakespeare plays were sort of the presentation of empire, were like a huge jump in colonial power, the idea of empire. Anyway, it's a bit off track, but I really think this almost looks like a mirror, this painting. It's not so big, 75 by 75, and this very decorative frame is what, you know, mirrors are more likely to have a frame like that. So it has got this feeling of looking into, you know, during an occult ceremony, or, you know, the high-level whistleblowers say that all of these mansions in Europe and America that have mirrors, the mirrors are access points. They are, they are for conjuring. They are for evoking. So
Black
she floats.
mirrors, right? Is that what they call them? Black
Yeah,
mirrors?
yeah, it could be. Well, it could be. Definitely looks like that, doesn't it? It's not. It's a black and
Yeah, well, I think they call them scrying mirrors in witchcraft. They're a real thing, and they literally
yes.
look into them, and it's like a crystal ball. They speak with the muses or communicate with the dead or whatever they claim they're doing. But either way, they use black mirrors as a way to gain access to the spirit realm. And we all carry a black mirror around in our pockets these days. That's what we're doing with these things. So it's makes you think when you actually understand this. And to her have this black background, with ghostly, ghastly figures coming out through it, definitely gives me the impression of something like that. And what's she holding there in her hands?
Oh, that's Pallas Athena. It's a long story, and it's not always the same story. It's about somehow that she has the power, or she was in a lesbian relationship with a mortal, and somehow this one died, and then she carries her. It's not the same story you hear every time, but sometimes she's just Athena, sometimes she's Pallas Athena, and Pallas is the little doll-like figure carrying the light. It really this one begs a whole different analysis, doesn't this, Penny? But I wanted to bring it in because it also relates to that one that looked a bit seance-y before, with the floating faces.
Absolutely. Interesting.
And Freud, Mr. Materialist, was actually a great fan of the gods. This has only come out really pretty recently, the last 10 years, all his collection of arcane figures that he had on his desk, that he paid a lot of money in antiquities. And this was the one he valued the most, the one of a little statue of Athena. So that's odd. And it was the first thing that he took when he escaped from Austria for London when the Nazis were getting strong.
Well, the pagans love their idols, don't they?
They do. They absolutely do. So this Adela bloc-bauer, we saw that gorgeous portrait of hers, was in a lot of Klimt paintings. This one is to do with Judith and Holofernes. I think we better keep skipping on, but you can see that this is, again, this kind of seductive, sort of sexual image that's sort of associated with death. But Holofernes in the Bible, it's in the Septuagint, it's not in the Protestant Bible. But she cuts off the head of this wicked judge, and then allows the Israelites to be free of a victory. We better skip on a bit. That is her on the right. You can just recognise her face in. And I just like to show this one. There's another one on this pinky, Japanesey looking one, 1912, already a bit later. Actually, Klimt left behind the gold a bit. He moved into this style that was more influenced by Japanese prints. But again, Adele is the model. And these two paintings were of the 5 that the Maria Altman, had to bring a great court case to reclaim. And she actually sold this portrait in 2006 to Oprah Winfrey. And we've probably talked about this before, but art at this level is money laundering, this kind of scale. So the paintings on long-term loan to Museum of Modern Art in New York. So the public purse pays for its, its security, its insurance, its cleaning, its all of that. Oprah Winfrey never takes possession of the painting. She sells it then 10 years later, 2016, for a nice profit, almost doubles her money, to an unidentified Chinese money. I mean, this is just how it works, this money that circulates amongst these extremely wealthy people. And, we know that people of that level too are involved in horrific, nefarious activities for which they can't show, general, accounts, above board accounts. And so this is one way that this money gets into their hands.
Yep, it's a good way to move money around with no questions asked. Absolutely,
no questions. And also, how do you put a price on these paintings? You can call them anything. I mean, it's not just about the market; it's about who's allowed to buy the painting.
Absolutely.
And this was its first presentation. I just wanted to show how the gallery looked. Again, very different to modern galleries. but there's on the left in fact, it was originally called the Lovers, the Liebespaar, and on the right you can see there's the portrait of Adele. But
quite interesting that portrait there, the one you showed me, where she's wearing this beautiful dress adorned with eyes. It's just there on the left, but those eyes are encased within pyramids. So this is definitely hinting heavily towards Illuminati references. I believe it was Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria who started the Illuminati. In
very close, basically, just over the Alps from Vienna.
I think that was in 1776. Actually, he did that, which is when America was founded. Funnily enough, it's the same time period, and obviously this is maybe 100. What's this? 150 years, Billy. I don't know. So,
quite 120, not that long.
But by this point, I think it became well established as a thing, and the all-seeing eye of providence, the eye of illumination. We'll call it Lucifer, which is basically what it is, the light bringer. He is here. It's in this painting, and she is adorned in it in this painting in the top left. And I can't help it.
Is it showing her as a witch? I mean, it may well be that she's a priestess in this, because
with her connections
to sexual energy.
Her family ties would definitely hint towards some occult understanding, at least. And I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know these people. I wasn't there, and this is the problem with secret societies. They're very secretive. And you can only infer through what they've publicly shown what is going on in their minds when they do these things. And looking at this, I cannot help but see that this is the eye on the back of the $1 bill in America. It's the same thing, This is a high occult level, top of the capstone, the capstone of the pyramid of the control system symbolism. Okay, so it's just a reference to her bloodline, Rothschild.
I think she had a personal role. I think this seductive is not just about being his mistress. He had many other mistresses he could have painted and did. This is about her enormous power that sort of leaks through all of these images. Even the seemingly innocent-y one with the colourful Japanese, is also, it's almost like a kind of almost somehow a bit schoolgirly, and yet it's still seductive. That's odd. But we'll keep moving. So actually the original name, like on the back of the painting somewhere at one stage for a short time, was Apollo and Daphne. Now that changes things a bit, because if it somehow is a reference to Apollo, the god, who is a second generation, so he was Zeus's son, Apollo kisses Daphne in that, basically he goes after her and wants to rape her. And she begs the trees to save her, and she gets, as her reward is to be turned into a tree, and then into a laurel tree, and then there is a kiss. He does kiss the tree after this. This is missing from some of the depictions of the story, but Klimt seems to show the turning into the tree part, and Apollo thereafter wears the laurel tree. This is this incredible Bernini sculpture. I mean, breathtaking sculpture showing, carved out of marble, unbelievable.
Look at that
her
thing.
Turning into the laurel.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there's a lot of this Daphne when you start to look at it, and Daphne and spring. So there's something really significant. Of course, Apollo, meant to be the patron of the gods, but somehow Daphne and this female figure being transformed is through other artists around Klimt too. But I wanted to point out again, like we saw with the Gorgon on the emblem on Athena's chest, Apollo's symbol becomes the laurel. So not only does he rape her, but he then wears this laurel as a trophy of power. And we see that now to this day. This is where the laurel leaf comes from in the Olympics, in sports. I mean, it's horrific.
It's the thing that he raped and then plucks leaves from her afterwards to wear as a crown. Right. I mean, that alone, all of it just sounds very suspect, doesn't it? And
ghastly.
And obviously the Olympics, to be an Olympian, which is the gods on Mount Olympus, and there's pantheons, Apollo reference there. It's all kind of there.
Right, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. Keep going. Tangent.
Right. And it's so interesting. There's so many things to spin off into. But I just wanted to show that there's really good reason to think it was originally Apollo and Daphne in the kiss. So the legs are almost identical to this very, very old fresco in Naples. I mean, really early fresco, probably, I don't know, 200 AD or something like that. And so he's clearly been looking at that. There's this great mystery about who the models are for this painting. And today, I think people get it's a bit conspiratorial if you say, well, was it actually Klimt and one of his models? There's a red-haired Hilda from Vienna, which I don't think it was. I think it was Charles Rennie Mackintosh and his wife, Margaret MacDonald Mackintosh. And I really think this is them. And this is bizarre. And I don't know, I've only seen one other reference, scouring the internet, to somebody who also suspects that. But, all right, forget about the moustache, which I don't know he always had. But Mackintosh, it could easily be his black curly hair. Margaret definitely had red hair. That's absolutely, there's a lock of her hair in the Glasgow School of Art archives. So, what does this suggest? I mean, someone will say, well, does it suggest a coercive relationship? I don't know, maybe. I mean, she was a very strong, very creative artist herself and designer. Most people think completely underrated. But it just seemed as though there's something else at work here. They definitely did visit, Mackintoshes did visit Vienna in 1900. So that puts them literally connecting, meeting, possibly sitting for sketches.
And you believe it was Mackintosh's style of architecture there and interior design, which has inspired the secessionist architecture and interior for that little gallery.
That's pretty mainstream, and of course there's slight differences, but the secession came after the Glasgow School of Art.
So another connection, putting them in the same place, same time, same circles, a contemporary at least, and they knew each other. They knew of each other at least.
And I did see one other person to sort of say, could this be consummation of some kind of ritual? Now this enters a whole other thought. So we've talked already about this potential, psychedelic aspect. And I'm no expert, and there may be flowers that are purely just invented decorative flowers, but my goodness, that looked like a morning glory dotted around there. And the morning glories are, they can be purple, they could be blue, yellow. There may be other plants that I don't recognize, but morning glory is a very well-known psychoactive hallucinogen. And dangerous, but very available. It grows everywhere. Again, a vine, and dangerous psychoactive effects. So here we are looking at the painting now. Okay, we start with decorative, romantic, possibly erotic, and then we start to think, well, psychedelic. Is she in a liminal state? He may be, but she definitely is in some sort of trance state. Is it non-consensual? Her eyes and mouth are closed. It's not like she's really encouraging this. Constrained feet. We should point out that in both cases, this ornament covers their nakedness. So the inside of the robe are these flowers, are these swirls. She's wearing some kind of flowery robe, but the sense of nakedness, like it's very sort of squishy flesh being hinted at there. And this loss of identity, it's no longer, it's sort of like not in control of personhood in a way. So we talked about metamorphosis, whether it's an alchemical space, a cape-like garment that he has, and is it a ritual space where basically the reality of what is around them falls away? So it reminds us of that Kubrick's film Eyes Wide Shut. And there's many reasons why the sort of ritual sex in that movie, I mean, there seems to be many different kinds of, sex magic in these circles, but the ritual sex in Kubrick's movie is unusual because it's demonstrated, it's shown to us, albeit perhaps in a stylized way, so that we see the ritual circle above left wearing masks. We see below, before Nicole Kidman leaves for the party, she's standing between the Ashtaroth poles, the Joachim and Boehm, or sometimes called the Baal pillars.
Yes.
So there's this gap between, you don't know, is her, this everyday self that is that she and her husband, he's a wealthy doctor, lives in New York,
I've just
everyday life.
noticed the curtains are positioned so it creates a tiered pyramid out of the blinds behind.
Oh yes, yeah.
And she's in the
Yeah,
center
like
of it.
a ladder. You're
Yeah,
right, like a ladder. Yeah,
in the center of
steps.
the two pillars.
Yeah,
Just a side note, just noticed
yeah.
that randomly.
And
Go
look,
ahead.
Kubrick's loaded. Absolutely loaded.
Yeah.
So the people who've done a really good job, particularly separately and together. Jay Dyer and Sean McCann do fantastic podcasts breaking down that real insight into the Kubrick movies, but especially Eyes Wide Shut. But in a way, I think by now I'm all hats off to them. But in a way, I think we can't deny that it's about, he is putting on view something about, at least something of the rituals that go on and have done for, centuries. And in this one, in Eyes Wide Shut, it seems to be a ritual for a breeder program where these women who may not be bloodline in any way, probably aren't, are impregnated by aristocrats anonymously and then form the next generation of sexually available young women, and the cycle continues. So this is this is unusual. I've never seen this depicted quite before. Klimt has a few other references to these women being overpowered and impregnated by, in this case, Zeus, to form these other gods. So we have lots of Klimt depicting women asleep, overcome, whether we think there may be hallucinogens involved. Do you remember Vienna also was the home of hypnosis? So back in the 1700s, mesmer, so we get the term mesmerized, was the first modern form that we, in medicine or in quasi-medicine, was being discussed, to hypnosis. Freud started off in hypnosis, using hypnosis. He, seemingly denied it thereafter. But Vienna has this very strange connection between medicine, drugs, soporific drugs, cocaine, hallucinogens, and these ritual sort of secret societies who may or may not have been using hypnosis on what seemed to be these sort of innocent young girls. So, just a few more stills, but this is where right at the end, it's really underplayed, but you can't unsee it once you see it, where the parents, played by Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, have to give up their daughter to the system, and then go home and make another one. It's just, and there's still this kiss of the Nicole Kidman and the daughter. So the story Eyes Wide Shut is based on a novel by Arthur Schnitzler, and he was a Viennese doctor and then became a writer exactly at the time of Klimt, exactly at the time of Freud. And this is no coincidence then that the publishers who republished this novel called Dream Story, you very often use Klimt paintings as covers. So I'm saying that, they might be saying, because his book is about kind of decadence and the use of these street women, ordinary women, vulnerable women for the elite. And it's all done in this sort of seductive, sexy sort of, cover. But somehow the publishers are in no doubt that's what Klimt was depicting. And another aside, but they're so interesting. So Klimt and Freud were contemporaries. They lived very close to one another in a population, relatively small population. Of course, they knew of each other. And Freud people used to say, oh, you look so much alike. They'd say it to both people. And they agreed that, they'd seen, and they may have seen each other from afar and they'd seen photographs. But Freud wanted to never meet Schnitzler in person because he said Schnitzler was his doppelganger, would be a symbol of death. Now, this is really odd. Again, he's incredibly, superstitious and interested in strange practices of mythology as trophies that he had in his offices. But you tell me if those two don't look like they're brothers. I reckon I'd eat my hat. And again, who knows? They both have similar Jewish backgrounds from the Odessa, Khazaria region. But there just seems to be, like, so many secrets. Did they meet? Probably. And they're never going to admit it. And they would definitely not be seen in public together, ever, ever, ever.
Mm-hmm.
But they did admire each other. So both studied medicine and then became writers.
Interesting. So it's almost like the path was carved out for them in a way.
Yes,
kind of like they were destined to become these people who did these things. And they look like brothers, yet don't know of each other, supposedly, and have never met each other.
Right.
And it could be that they're the product of this eyes wide shut situation in these secret societies where they're just kind of creating people and grooming them and putting them out there in the world.
And then they all have a role to play. They all have a, they have to be very, 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 very elite to just sit around and do nothing. They all have a role to play. Mm-hmm. They all have contracts to fulfill. They all, this is just a given. Mm-hmm. So another one, real side tangent now. I really think Stanley Kubrick, the director on the left there, and Lenny Bruce, the comedian on the right, I think they were related. They could be brothers to me. Again, the same sort of humour. I know, it's a bit of a long shot, but that's just my rumination.
Who knows?
Literally 3 years apart in New York.
I'm all for speculation here. This is the place to speculate.
We'll throw it out there.
Yeah, go for it.
So just remembering that there's this gap between these lovely, lovely society portraits on the right there, like Singer Sargent would display, these very flattering, beautiful clothing, sumptuous garments, and then this very dark stuff on the left, this really kind of, vampiric or, witch-like figures. And Klimt was obsessed with eroticism throughout his life and notoriously promiscuous. So he used to bring poor young women off the street and to sketch them in his studios, would often have, a dozen women just floating around in his studio at a time. And he fathered at least 14 children, at least 14, never married, and lived all his life with his mother. So I always say someone had to clean his tunic, someone had to do his laundry. I guess his mother had that role. But meanwhile, this, basically abusing these poor young women who were, there was a lot of poverty in Vienna. There's a real gap between rich and poor.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of this frieze you've shown me here. And maybe you'd have to get it up on screen yourself. But his style with the gold and the black and the dress style reminds me of the Minoan goddesses. Have you seen these before?
Ah, yes. Yeah, you're right. The Minoan Greek.
And they hold the snake in each hand.
Ah, yes.
And often has their arms to the side doing that. So obviously you saw Athena holding that miniature woman with her arms out in a similar position. Mm-hmm. And the black and gold and the patterns are very much like the Minoan goddess. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's some influence there in some way. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I'm just looking at here. I don't know if people can see it on the screen, but it's very similar.
Yes.
Very similar in style. He is another very ordained in gold type person. Right. And it's just, I'm just getting that vibe. Just another flashback just came to me then from my research, like things I've seen, things I have seen, and
yes.
Definitely seen
in
that
way,
influence
it's more like that than Egyptian. I mean, at first we'd say, there's an Egyptian reference, yes, but it's actually Minoan. Yeah, I think you're onto something. So this is his studio, which is, is just still set up today. So was he supplying women? Was he supplying not just his own sexual needs, but
perhaps
for others?
Perhaps. I mean, he was clearly seeing something going on behind the scenes. He's clearly a well-connected person of the time, well known by influential people himself, and clearly working intimately with influential people. And I find artists, even today, you find the strange ones hanging around with the rich and influential, like Marina Abramovich, for example. Like everybody in the industry knows her. You know what I mean? And she's always around them in some way, or
and she's a witch.
And she's obviously a witch. Yeah, basically just outright a
Yeah.
blood drinking witch. There's no other
Yeah.
way to put it.
Occult
And she'll
practitioner.
even tell you
Yeah.
she does that. And I think artists, as the outsider to the society in a way, kind of play a very similar role to, let's say, the shaman in other cultures, who's outside of society looking in. And the shaman is the intermediary between the spiritual realm and the physical realm. And I feel like in a Western context, and it's usually very satanic in nature and perverted in nature, but these artists sometimes seem to play a similar role
Yeah.
in some way,
Yeah.
like a go-to for the rich and influential to create portraits that are perverted or be involved in something weird going on behind the scene, a ritual of sorts, and I feel like that's what's going on here. I feel like Klimt may have been something similar. He certainly walks around dressed like a shaman,
Yeah.
in
Yeah,
his
that's
robes,
true.
and maybe
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like just the Western cover. Oh, I'm an artist, but what he really is an occult practitioner, and it's his kind of cover story. I'm just an artist,
And
an odd eccentric, nothing to think about, nothing to
it's
worry about,
definitely more than an observer, isn't it? You feel that he's a participant and engaging. So when he's
Yeah.
depicting these orgies, he's obviously a participant, but he's also then the other aspect is that the artist then depicts these things, albeit against society's convention, but then the elite absolutely celebrate that. Do you know, like they actually want it to be seen. They just want to be at arm's length from that.
Yeah.
But they revel in the fact that people are, it's a record of their power over people, over the people in the depiction, over us as viewers looking on and observing and admiring the artwork. I guess this is where I wanted to sort of end with this, is that, all right, now this is another one that I think on the right there clearly depicts an orgy of some sort. And then on the left, hello, it's just, literally it's sex and death. And then in this one, clearly there's at least one child and emphasizing the child's genitals. This is really odd to pull it apart. And yet we're supposed to, on mainstream, what might see this as slightly, edgy, but would still see this as beautiful. Well, this is kind of horrific and begs so many questions. And then death on the left there with some kind of great, what is that, a club or some sort of crystal or, magical instrument. And then we sort of feel a little bit like those shapes that were on the man in the kiss. These are more like crucifixes, but this kind of rectangles and blackness. And on the right, this fluid, psychedelic abstract shapes.
The death figure looks like something straight out of Haitian voodoo. Very similar in motifs, actually, in design and colors as well. Papa Legba, Baron Semidi is often shown in purple and blue, those dark colors.
Yeah.
The Catholic cross. Haitian voodoo is like an odd blend of French Freemasonic Catholicism mixed with like African ancestor spirit worship. It's an odd blend of a lot of things. That character reminds me of those gods from that particular ancestor spirit worship culture, and they kind of commune with death spirits by creating dolls that look like this, just like this, so I feel like there's definitely an influence there in some way. But this massive flesh and fabric, I can see how people at a glance would say this is a beautiful symbolic piece to represent birth and death, but at a closer inspection, is this perhaps an extremely inappropriate orgy? It's just that simple.
Sure.
It's just that simple. There's nothing else to read into it. And it was created by somebody who's an strange eccentric who can get away with it. And then, it's basically a celebration for the elite who commissioned these type of things to get away with the work being immortalized, I suppose, in a way.
I think one of the big myths of art is that it's about imagination. I think, forget imagination, it's about observation.
Yeah.
And so people would say, oh, hasn't he got an amazing, he's thinking about how dangerous syphilis is, all the women he's had sex with, and that sex and death, that was to do with that Edvard Munch painting of you don't know if you're having sex with a prostitute, you might end up with syphilis, and there's no cure at that time. But you just think, no, I think he was looking, seeing, experiencing and in a way recording. So I don't think this idea that, oh, he just imagined these things is just such a nonsense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Another one, there are quite a few of these, but again, the maidens, the virgins, it's called, is kind of, you can't even quite work out how many figures are there. You just know you're not seeing all of them, but they're all interchangeable, aren't they? None of the women have identities. They're all just fodder, and they're not just beautiful flowers. That's the way I think a mainstream, might look at them, these gorgeous young women, the flower of youth. But it's really them being just chunked together namelessly, and then part of a swirl of flowers that will fade and get tossed out. We see a lot of swirls there, don't we? That's a kind of more contemporary signal for a certain kind of
yes, things we're probably not allowed to
sexuality.
talk about. Things we're probably not allowed to talk about on YouTube.
We don't even really want to, do we?
But those who know, if you know what I mean. And I think there's something to be said as again for being in like a psychedelic stupor as well. These ladies are probably all drugged, which is probably what's symbolic of the patterns there as well, perhaps. Just a thought. Just a thought.
For sure. I think so, absolutely. And just kind of finally just ending with this idea that artists look at other artists' work. So when Kubrick made his film, and there are people, as I said, who go through kind of shot by shot and sequence by sequence, but can you just see the arms on Nicole Kidman and the arms on the painting on the left? Kubrick obviously looked really hard at, he knew a lot about art, and he looked a lot at Klimt's paintings. That's not coincidence. That's actually a direct, reminder that he'd looked at Klimt. And so what he's depicting in his, showing the ritual circles, the summoning circles, and then the impregnation of these young girls with, demonic appearances is also something that he read in Klimt. So I think I think it's again confirms us.
Like you said, the author of the original book that film's based on is a contemporary of Klimt. So living in the same circles, seeing the same things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm just sort of saying that, look, we as visual people, as people who think visually, admire art, admire cinema, some of us, we really just have to remember that in some ways, where we are today, somehow these have become trophies of demonic suffering, of summoning, rather. So to the elite, to the dark cult, these are trophies, and our ignorance in admiring them, not just the energy of standing in front of a painting and admiring, that's part of it, but this admiring without revealing the potential meaning of these artworks, that they record something else, is just absolutely, they're mocking us.
Well, I think you mentioned it to me in the previous conversation. I'm not sure what I can actually say, names, trigger words for YouTube, but there was a particular lady who had a photo taken of her apartment, and in the background on the wall was an extremely disturbing image of a young person naked in a suitcase, basically.
Yeah, horrible. Yeah.
And then she had to try to explain herself. And I don't know what she came up with. It was I don't know what nonsense she came up with to justify why having that on your wall is something you should have on your wall. But your description there probably aptly explains more so why these things happen. It's a trophy.
It's mockery. Trophy.
It's something there to remember, something she herself perhaps may have been involved with at some point, and is perhaps proud of being involved with. And therefore, to display it on your wall is a reminder of something she wants to be reminded of. You know what I mean? And it's kind of...
I'm not sure whether I saw it just recently. I don't even know if it might have been one of your feed in your Telegram feeds, but it was Goldie Hawn just having a television interview, and in the background it's a painting with panda eyes. It's not a painting of a panda. It's a painting of that horrible thing that happens, in a certain abuse of children to the blackened eyes. And again, you think so it's signaling something. We're starting to kind of understand, but we know we don't know all of it. But is it to signal to other people who are trying to access, is that also what this person that we looked at in, we saw in her office, in her Hollywood office, had this horrible, thing of a child in a body in a suitcase. It's signaling to the people that come into the office, but in fact, they know very well they're being filmed. So they're just, I'm sure they're a bit annoyed that we know, that we know now, because, we'll have to do a separate one on Marina, because Marina Abramovich, because she's is so much more overt. So we know that we guess that they're trying to make it all a bit more socially acceptable.
Oh yeah, we're in a different
So,
time now. The game's changed. This is not secretive, underhanded, slight glimpse symbolism anymore. This is normalized, full on externalization and normalization. That's what we're living through now. And the problem is that any industry in arts, I think the leaders who own these industries are occultists themselves and members of the similar societies who create these type of things, who are involved in this type of activity. They're in the business of creating idols. They're creating stars. We call them stars, famous people.
Yes.
And the whole point of an idol is to be emulated. So they create artists who promote things which are obscene, and then young, impressionable, up-and-coming students see these artists and think, I have to be like that to be known and become famous, basically. That's what art is, because that's what famous people who are artists make. So I will do the same as a contemporary, and then you find there's a perpetuation of the same style, and then things get worse from there. But it's like a slow, each generation adds a new leap to the satanic elements, and the obvious nature of it. And now we're basically being an artist today is being a demon summoner, basically. But that's basically what it is.
It feels it's come down to that in so many cases. I mean, it's what is promoted. It's what is made, what is promoted, what gets through the, the gates of acceptability. And it starts so innocently, or seemingly so innocently. But even that we have a genre of art, that we have an art that is over there to our lives, even that is sort of disturbing, isn't it? Like that it's so we say, okay, art's a form of communication, and I'm still with people on that, but what is it? Isn't our life a celebration of the glory of God and the beauty that surrounds? I mean, there is no artwork more beautiful than a flower. There is no art than a real flower. There is nothing that anybody can paint or see or do that competes with that. But certainly they're not trying to.
Well, was there that passage in the Bible? King Solomon himself ordained in all of his fine robes does not look as beautiful as this flower. Didn't even come close,
The lilies of the field.
Exactly. Yeah. So I agree.
Yeah. So I think I suppose I've got a number of other presentations to look at, and some longer than others. This is one of the longer ones, but the things that are overlooked, but it really helps us to understand, because it also tells us about the culture of the time, what was really going on there, as well as, the way art has played the role in that. I think we actually learn something from this. There is a certain evidential force in this artwork that is helpful for us, that is actually informing to us.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you've shown me the presentations you have coming in the future. From the looks of it, we're going to be going through the decades, kind of examining big names throughout the modern era, before the postmodern era, which we kind of live in today, and showing the occult undertones in all of it, and it's always been there. And I think this is a good way for our audience who will follow these works and this series that perhaps we're going to continue. There's just how long this has been going on, and just how artists actually do think, behind the scenes, and the circles they kind of walked in, which gives the context for these pieces, which at a glance do look beautiful. Great skill does go into many of these.
Yeah, sure.
But the subject matter is probably not what you've interpreted it to be. The artist had an intention, and you can get that, or at least it can become evident what those intentions truly were when you start looking into the stuff we've looked in today, for example. And I think this is a good practice. And I learned a lot about art history today, as I hope the viewers have too, Yeah.
So, and of course, we just know, I mean, is that going to stand are they going to stand the test of time? Art can be many things, and it can evolve, but where we are now, it's definitely, its role is, as I say, it's degraded to what kind of idealism there was in the past. Not just technically, that's a good way of also observing it, but in terms of its content, what seemed important at one time is not important. In words that I think, what's being depicted here is still as relevant today.
It's funny. I was just I did a live show for members only on my other channel, and I ended up sharing Martin Creed's work and
Oh,
his
yes.
piece of paper scrunched up into a ball, A4
Yes.
paper.
Just these gestures. Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that was piece number 88, funnily enough. And I noticed it was 88 million, to which that art piece was sold to Oprah Winfrey.
Oh,
And I think there's something to do with 88 and the occult
88.
when it comes to
Yeah.
degradation or
Oh,
something
yeah.
like that. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I was just thinking about his piece of paper, and obviously you talk about the debasement and devaluement and the decay of art and standards itself. And I was watching this video of some young art students talking about the piece of paper as though it meant something. And it just,
I mean, you haven't got it on screen, but an artwork like that only has meaning because it is an extreme luxury that one young artist can screw up a piece of paper, put it on the gallery wall, challenge, the self-importance of the art world. The art world laps it up. But it's only because everybody's watching, everybody's admiring. In another culture, if you did that in Tanzania, if you did that in, New Guinea, it has no meaning. It just doesn't have meaning. So it's only because it sort of reinforces how powerful the art world is, that you can do the smallest, silliest gesture and it'll still be absorbed as meaningful, serious, intentional, important. Yeah, that will fade, that one for sure.
Well, I am going to do a scathing review of Martin Creed, because I think the guy I think he's a troll. I think he's been paid to purposely debase art. I think even he admits to himself in many of his artworks that he doesn't know what he's doing. He's literally making up as he goes along, and he can't believe people are taking him seriously. Like,
Right.
I really think that's the case. I don't think he is an artist. I think he admits he's not an artist as well.
Right.
And I think he's just one of the...
It's just like we should say, useful idiot.
A useful idiot is a perfect phrase, and he gets his pockets lined, and his job is just to come up with anything and anything he possibly can and call it art, basically. But that's neither here nor there for that presentation. That's coming in the future on my own channel. But
good.
I look forward to having you back on. I'm sure my audience has learned something here today as well, and I think this is a bit of fruitful discussion. So thanks for doing this, Susan. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Okay,
No problem.
thanks.
God bless.